Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talker Story class. Now, before we start our story, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever seen those really big woven bags? They usually have a checkered pattern, maybe red and blue or blue and white. You see them at markets, or maybe your parents use them when you are moving houses or storing old winter clothes. But in West Africa, specifically in Nigeria and Ghana, that bag has a name, a very famous name. It is called the Ghana Must Go bag. That's a strange name for a bag, isn't it? It sounds like a command. It sounds like someone is shouting. Well, today we are going to find out exactly why that innocent bag got such a serious name. We are going to uncover the story of two countries, Nigeria and Ghana, that act a lot like siblings. You know, sometimes siblings are best friends and share everything, and sometimes they get into big arguments and slam doors. This story is about one of the biggest arguments they ever had, way back in the year 1983. To understand why people were leaving, we first have to understand why they came. So let's rewind the clock. Let's go back to the 1970s. Imagine you are living in Nigeria in the 1970s. It was an exciting time. It was almost like winning the lottery. You see, Nigeria discovered that it had a lot of oil buried deep underground. Oil is sometimes called black gold because it is worth so much money. Suddenly, Nigeria was rich. The government had money to build giant skyscrapers, miles and miles of smooth roads, big bridges, and fancy universities. But here is the thing. When you want to build all those huge things, you need people to do the work. You need construction workers. You need teachers for the new schools. You need doctors for the new hospitals, and bakers to make bread for all the workers. Now, let's look next door at Ghana. If you look at a map of West Africa, you'll see Nigeria is the big country, and if you move left, you go through two skinny countries, Benin and Togo, and then you hit Ghana. While Nigeria was having a big party with its oil money, things in Ghana were tough, really tough. Their economy wasn't doing well, jobs were hard to find, and food was expensive. So, when Ghanaians looked over at their neighbor, Nigeria, they saw opportunity. They saw a place where they could work hard and earn money to send back to their families. So they moved. And it wasn't just a few people. It was hundreds of thousands of people.
Maybe even more than 1 million. Imagine the entire population of a big city just picking up and moving to another country. Ghanaians became teachers in Nigerian schools. They were the best shoemakers. They built houses. They sold ice cream. They became a huge part of everyday life in Nigeria. For a while, it was great. It was like a giant sleepover where everyone was having fun and helping each other out. But, as we know, history has a way of twisting and turning. Fast forward to the early 1980s. The black gold, the oil, started to lose its value. The price of oil dropped all over the world. Suddenly, the money that was flowing into Nigeria like a rushing river turned into a tiny little trickle. When a country runs out of money, things get scary. The government couldn't pay for all those big projects anymore. Construction stopped, schools struggled, and the worst part was that the price of food started going up. Imagine going to the cafeteria to buy lunch, and yesterday it cost $2, but today it costs $10. That makes people hungry, and it makes them angry. When people are scared and hungry, they often look for someone to blame. It's human nature, unfortunately. Instead of looking at the price of oil or the global economy, many people in Nigeria started looking at their neighbors. This wasn't true. The problem was the oil prices, but it was an easy story to believe. The tension started to build up. It was like a balloon getting blown up too tight. You just knew it was going to pop. Then the balloon popped. On January 17, 1983, the leader of Nigeria at the time, President Shehu Shagari, made a huge announcement. Now, alien sounds like someone from outer space, right? But in government language, it just means someone who isn't a citizen of that country. The order was simple and shocking. It said that anyone who didn't have the proper papers to be in Nigeria had to leave. That sounds like a normal rule, right? But here was the catch. He gave them 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I want you to pause and think about your own house. Look around your bedroom. Look at your toys, your clothes, your books. Now imagine your parents telling you, pack everything you can carry. Panic. That is the only word to describe it. Absolute panic. Remember, these weren't just tourists visiting for the weekend. These were people who had lived there for years. They had rented apartments, their children were in Nigerian schools, they had pets, they had jobs.
And now they had 14 days to pack it all up. This is where the bag comes back into our story. People rushed to the markets. They needed suitcases, but suitcases are expensive and heavy. They needed something cheap, something light, and something that could stretch to hold everything they owned. Clothes, pots, pans, radios, shoes. The cheapest bag available was that woven checkered bag we talked about earlier. It came in huge sizes. You could stuff it until it looked like a giant marshmallow. Because almost every single Ghanaian person fleeing the country was carrying 1 or 2 of these specific bags, the bag itself became the symbol of the event. Even today, 40 years later, if you go to a market in Lagos or Accra and ask for a Ghana must go, they will hand you that checkered bag. So, the deadline is ticking. Tick, tock. January is ending. Over 1 million people are trying to leave at the same time. Can you imagine the traffic? It wasn't just hopping on a plane. Most people didn't have money for plane tickets. They had to go by road. They packed into trucks, buses, taxis, anything with wheels. Imagine open back trucks meant for carrying timber or sand, now filled with 50 people standing up, holding their checkered bags, trying to get home. But the journey wasn't easy. Remember the map? To get from Nigeria to Ghana, you have to cross 2 other countries, Benin and Togo. Here is where the story gets really dramatic. Benin is the country right next to Nigeria. When 1 million people showed up at the border of Benin, the government of Benin got scared. They thought, we can't handle all these people. So, for a few days, the border was closed, locked. Imagine being stuck in the middle of nowhere. It's hot, it's dusty. You have your bag, but you ran out of water 2 days ago. You are sleeping on the ground by the side of the road. There were lines of cars and trucks that stretched for miles and miles. It was a humanitarian crisis, which is a fancy way of saying a situation where humans are suffering and need help urgently. Eventually, the borders were opened and the great trek continued. It was dangerous. Some people fell off the overcrowded trucks. Some people got sick. But slowly, surely, they made it back to Ghana. Now, you might think, well, at least they were going home to Ghana. Well, it was complicated. Remember, Ghana was poor at this time. That's why the people left in the first place. Suddenly, the country had to find space for 1 million new people. There wasn't enough food. There weren't enough houses. They set up camps in schools and stadiums just to give people a place to sleep. It was a very hard time for everyone. But humans are resilient. That means they are tough
and they bounce back. The people who returned, the returnees, were hardworking. Remember, they had gone to Nigeria to work. They brought back new skills. Some who had learned to be master bakers in Nigeria opened bakeries in Ghana. Some who built skyscrapers in Lagos helped build new neighborhoods in Accra. Over time, they reintegrated. They became part of the family again. Now, as we get ready to wrap up our story, there is a twist. History loves irony. Irony is when the opposite of what you expect happens. Do you know that in the 1960s, about 15 years before this happened, Ghana had done almost the exact same thing to Nigerians? Yes. In 1969, Ghana chased out Nigerians who were living there. And then in 1983, Nigeria chased out Ghanaians. It was like a sad game of ping pong where people were the ball. This teaches us a very important lesson about neighbors. Nigeria and Ghana are like cousins. They eat similar food, they listen to similar music, and they trade with each other. They need each other. When one pushes the other away, both of them end up hurting a little bit. Today, things are much better. There is an organization called ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. It's a group that includes Nigeria, Ghana, and their neighbors. They made new rules that make it much easier for people to travel and work in different countries without being chased away. They realized that walls and closed borders usually cause more problems than they solve. So, the next time you see one of those red and blue or black and white checkered bags, I want you to remember this story. Don't just see a laundry bag, see the history. See the black gold oil boom that built skyscrapers. See the hard times that made people move. See the families packing their lives into those woven squares in just 2 weeks. And remember that Ghana Must Go isn't just a funny name for a cheap tote bag. It's a reminder of a time when fear made people forget that we are all neighbors. It reminds us that how we treat people, especially when times are tough, is the most important thing of all. We have about a minute left, so let's think about what we would do in that situation. If a new kid came to our school because they had to leave their old school quickly, how would we treat them? Or would we be the helpers? History or just for adventure? The story of 1983 is a big dramatic example, but it happens on a smaller scale every day. So, keep your eyes open for those bags. You might see one at the grocery store or in a movie. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I will catch up with you again in another story.